Um, Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We're still having some people join us. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let more people join before we begin. All right, welcome, everybody. We're just giving it a minute or two for more people to join us, but we're going to be starting in just a minute or two, so thank you for your patience. Better? Yeah, okay. All right, welcome, everybody. We are going to be starting in just a minute as we let some other people into the program. All right. We will be, this program will be available and recorded, and we'll have it up on our website afterwards, as well as the League's YouTube channel. My name is Karen Daly, and I'm the VP of Programs for the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn. This is one of our community meetings, which we hold on a monthly basis on a topic that is of interest to our community and also that is supported by a league position. The title of the program tonight is Children Alone, the Plight of Unaccompanied Minors in the U.S. Immigration System. And while we have a moment, I'd like to just briefly summarize the League's position on immigration. So the League of Women Voters supports immigration policies that prioritize family reunification, meet economic needs, provide a path to citizenship, and ensure humane treatment, including for asylum seekers. They advocate for comprehensive reform, opposing family separation, and supporting legal representation and safety for all, regardless of status. So that's a summary of the League's position. We have a great panel tonight. Joining us is Amanda Ortiz, who's a senior attorney at Aparicio, sorry, immigration law, excuse me. We have Mary Roche, who's a program manager at the National Immigrant Justice Center, and Tatiana Padilla, Dr. Tatiana Padilla, who's a postdoctoral fellow, the Institute for Social Research and Data Innovation from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And we have tonight moderating our very own Kim Reed from the League of Glen Ellyn, who's also a League of Women Voters of Illinois issues and advocacy specialist. So the topic tonight, unaccompanied minors in the U.S. immigration system, is often discussed in headlines, but is the topic really understood? And so we were hoping to kind of dig into that tonight. Who are these children? What happens to them when they arrive, or if their parents or guardian are deported or detained, and what systems are responsible for their care and protection, and how is the coordination of that? So we thought with the three very different panelists that we have tonight, we could have a good discussion on that topic. So with that, I'll give it over to our moderator, Kim.
Thank you so much, Karen. And it's so nice to be with everyone tonight and have these wonderful panelists with us. And I just want to add to the league position, especially because we are talking about children, that the league has so many positions that support social policy positions that support protections and the welfare of children. And I think they come into play when we talk about unaccompanied children as well. So yeah, I'd like we're going to hear from each of the panelists a little bit about who they are and their organizations and what they do. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Ortiz first. So thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. So my name is Amanda. I'm a senior attorney at Aparicio Immigration Law. We are a mid to small size immigration firm in the West Loop of Chicago. We are Hispanic run, Hispanic owned immigration firm. We have about 6 attorneys on staff, and a little bit bigger size of paralegals. We do anything from family-based immigration to humanitarian, to removal defense and federal litigation. So we do work a lot with different diverse people, including unaccompanied minors. And our main thing is how do we help them get to a better position than where they are when they first arrive into the United States, whether that's helping them with legal status or helping them have more time in the United States. That's really our goal. We've been around for about 12 years now, and we continue to just try to serve the community as best as possible, continuing to grow and continue to just see how we can provide better service to the community.
Thank you so much. And prior to joining the team, you worked with unaccompanied minors. I mean, you have a history of doing this work.
Yes, that's correct. I've been doing immigration work since 2016, in various positions. And prior to joining up at East Immigration Law, I did work at a solely on unaccompanied minor organization where we worked a lot with asylum and with special immigrant juvenile status here.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Mary Roche with NIJC.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. My name is Mary Roche. I'm a program manager on our Children's Protection Project at NIJC. So the National Immigrant Justice Center is a large nonprofit based in Chicago, but with offices in Indiana and DC as well. And we combine 4 components in our work. I work on the direct legal services team, and we provide legal assistance, representation, pro se services, education for the community in the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. And increasingly, our clients are transferred to detention centers across the country that have really spread our reach quite a bit. But we also have teams that work on impact litigation to bring about immigrant positive or improved immigration laws, policy advocacy in working with legislators to improve the opportunities and resources for the immigrant community, and with strategic communications of reaching the community about these topics. My team in particular is the Children's Protection Project. We work exclusively with unaccompanied children. We provide legal services to detained unaccompanied children who are in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And then we also provide ongoing representation for unaccompanied children who are released from ORR custody. And we can talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, and who are reunified and living within our community. So the services are ongoing even beyond their release. Yeah, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And just a quick question. Could you tell people what ORR is?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So ORR is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. It's a program within the Department of Health and Human Services, and it is the entity that runs the shelters where unaccompanied children are held until they can be reunified with family members or contacts once they enter the United States.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary. And our third panelist is Dr. Tatiana Padilla. Tatiana.
Good evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for bringing us together on this important conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Dr. Tatiana Padilla. I'm an academic and a researcher currently at the University of Minnesota. And I'll just preface with, for the purpose of tonight's conversation, I'm here as an independent researcher, and these views are my own. So my work, similarly with unaccompanied minors, started nearly a decade ago at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants in Washington, D.C., where I served on the legal team, providing legal services and translation services to unaccompanied youth. And similarly, but across the country, my colleague, Dr. Gali, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, but I just shout out her book. She was conducting extensive ethnographic research on this population by shadowing immigration attorneys in Los Angeles that were helping unaccompanied minors navigate the asylum application process. Now, Dr. Gali and I came together at Cornell University, and our experiences really motivated us to ask, what happens to children in immigration court and what are the factors that shape their outcomes? But we quickly realized that there's a critical gap in understanding this population, specifically since 2017, when changes to government codes made the cases almost impossible to identify in immigration court records. So the severe data limitation prevented not just researchers, but advocates and government entities from knowing what is happening to this population. And we brought our expertise together to develop a method that allows us to identify unaccompanied minors in court records, and now have compiled the data of nearly 400,000 cases between 2009 and 2023 that allow us to really unveil patterns about these youths' experiences in immigration court. So we examined several factors from legal representation, case outcomes, demographics, their geography, and how these vary across time and across administrations. And I'm sure, mention some of the findings of our work, but I'll just preface some here for us to chew on and maybe inform some of the conversation moving forward. So during this time period, nearly 500,000 children entered the United States through the U.S. southern border. Primarily, they're from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and I'm talking specifically about unaccompanied minors. And despite the fact that they're formally a protected immigration group, and I say this in quotes because I'm sure the legal team on this call could better explain what this actually means, only 51% of unaccompanied minors have representation by an attorney at any point during their removal proceedings. And this really varies considerably, with representation rates varying from Republican to Democratic states, from rural to urban places. And we also find that individual characteristics really matter. So children's characteristics, including nationality, age, their gender, and the language they speak, informs not only their representation, but their outcomes in court. This is often referred to as the justice gap. So the gap between children who need legal assistance and those who actually get it. And we, discuss that these are just not equally distributed across the US. And then I'll conclude with just saying that approximately 50% of unaccompanied minor cases that we are able to identify end in deportation. And these case outcomes significantly vary across administration and by demographics of youths. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some more of this work and learning from the folks on this panel who bring a really diverse experience to the conversation. Thank you, Kim, for having me.
Of course, thank you so much, Tatiana. And so I'd like to hear from each of you more on that, what does it mean to be an unaccompanied minor, and what Tatiana brought up, that it matters where you're from and who you are. And I'm just curious, is that something that you, Amanda and Mary, have seen as well, and expound upon what does it mean to be an unaccompanied minor? And neither one of you can go first.
I can take this one, Amanda.
Great. Thanks, Mary.
So when children enter into contact with immigration enforcement, and they're determined to be under the age of 18 without the parent or legal guardian present, like immediately present to provide their care, and without legal status, they are designated unaccompanied children. And that designation must happen within 72 hours of entering into contact with immigration enforcement. And so most often at the US-Mexico border, what this entails is eventually referring children to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So that's that ORR designation that I mentioned earlier. And so once children are referred to ORR custody, they are placed in shelters across the country. There are many programs, in many different states. I think it's like up to 20 states now have ORR programs for unaccompanied children. And there's a range of like sizes of these programs, of settings. There are transitional foster care programs that allow children to be placed temporarily with foster families. The large majority of them are group homes, more of an institutional setting. And then there's long-term foster care as another option. And so this is provided for under a law called the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. And that provided for this system. And while children are in the custody of the US government for immigration purposes, they're to be held in the least restrictive setting. And so ORR custody is deemed the least restrictive setting. The other thing, so while they're in the ORR system, they are attending classes and receiving case management support, trying to identify and vet safe adults that they can go to that are already part of their network in their life. They also receive medical attention as needed. They have some mental health support as well. And then they also receive legal services. And so that's where my team comes in at NIJC. There are programs or legal service providers across the country that work with all of the different programs that are part of this network. Because a big component of being designated an unaccompanied child is being served a notice to appear. So this is the document that initiates their immigration removal case. They are placed into removal proceedings. The government is saying, you have to go to court. You have to fight to be able to stay in the United States because you do not have lawful status. So it starts a very long process for their legal case. And it really starts with that first designation and referral to ORR custody. They get that document on the first day that they enter the United States generally.
Amanda, what would you like to add to this? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think Mary covered the majority of what it means to be a UAC. I would just say for our side, I do more of once they are released from OR custody, it does become the struggle of them trying to find that legal representation. We have gone to court many times where children aren't represented and they are assigned to the most kindest judge in Chicago. So that is beautiful to see. She treats them very well and tries to help them, like motivate them, tell them what they need to do. But we've definitely seen UACs and what kind of struggles they have once they are released from the OR custody.
And so why are they released from ORR custody?
So typically, Merrick probably shed more light. They are released when they do find a sponsor to take them in. So that can be uncle and sometimes a parent that's already been in the United States for years and wanted them to come over to the United States. So once they are released to that parent under certain conditions. And then they do still have to go through their removal proceedings, but just outside of custody.
You hear on the news about very young children having to go to immigration court to and not being represented. And thank goodness that you speak of this very kind judge that is respectful. But what about in other places where maybe the judge isn't so kind and there isn't legal representation? And how could you even speak to how many times, how many situations like this come up?
I can't speak to outside of Chicago. I don't know if Mary or Tatiana have more statistics on that.
I can add a little bit of context through numbers just from our work. So when we talk about the really young children, the 0 to 4-year-olds, right? So just so we have like a picture of a toddler. These are actually the population with the lowest representation rates. We find that of the entire population of unaccompanied youth, they are a small fraction. They're about 7% of the entire population, but among that group, they have the lowest representation rates of about 35% of them with legal representation. That compares to, for like the next age group, let's say that's a 5 to 9-year-olds. That's about 10% of the unaccompanied population, and they have a representation rate of about 46%. And so I'm sure the folks that have legal experience in the room can speak a little bit to some of the challenges that it is to represent such a young person, and the challenges to connecting them with resources. From my personal experience, of course, language being one of those key barriers of access, but the onus, and I know we'll get to some of the misconceptions, but I just want to point out that the onus of proving your immigration case and passing your review of fear at the border is on the individual. And so we are placing that onus on 0 to 4-year-olds, right? They're unaccompanied because they have been determined to not have legal accompanied with them. But yeah, I'll pass the baton.
It's just incredible to think about that age group having to sit before a judge. So can you just shed some more light on the primary reasons that children end up here in the United States by themselves? And any one of you are welcome to just jump in. As I said earlier, for those of you who joined to watch this, that we want this to be a conversation, and so.
Yeah, I can start. I think for me, when I see children coming in for a consultation, to kind of see how they can move forward in the US, a lot of it is the lack of resources that they have in their home country, where they didn't have enough food, their parent couldn't make enough money, they couldn't attend school. So it was a 12-year-old working already 8-hour days, and parents sent them to the US for a better life. I would say the majority are just looking for a better life and looking to have better resources in the United States. The other side is some of them have been threatened by gang violence in their home country, where the only thing they can do is flee the country and come to the United States, hoping for something better and hoping to remain safe here.
Yeah, and Mary, that's what you are seeing as well.
Yes, I think that's very common reasons. I think one more to add would just be reunification with an adult, a parent who has left for those same reasons of seeking more opportunities or fleeing from violence or danger themselves.
Okay. And then, going back to Tatiana, so can you give us more information about the statistics of unaccompanied children in the U.S. system, and just more specifically, what you alluded to in your opening remarks about, the different groups that you identified, and would you have any kind of summary of that a takeaway for us?
Sure, yeah. That's a big question because you can analyze the population from a range of different demographic information. Of course, we are limited in our analysis to what's available in the court documents. So, nationality-wise, the largest country of origin is Guatemala. About 42% of unaccompanied minors are from that country, with the Northern Triangle making up the large portion, more than 75% coming from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Additionally, the majority of individuals that are unaccompanied minors and that we are able to identify in court records speak Spanish. About 93% of them do. And I will just caveat that, and this is, I think, a phenomenon that we observe as immigrant working scholars or legal teams. And it's that usually those cases that are unique in some way face unique challenges as well. So our system isn't inherently, for example, ready to provide translation services from someone that comes from an indigenous speaking community. Those children are going to have a far more difficult access to legal counsel because we know that 93% of individuals speak Spanish. So when I say, some of these smaller numbers these smaller portion of the unaccompanied population maybe seem small, but their challenges are surmounted by the fact that they have these unique descriptives. In terms of where unaccompanied minors are located, and of course we match this to where their core is, so it's a big range, but we see the largest population in Texas, about 15% in Texas and about 13% in California, with the rest of the states slowly trickling down. Detention is quite rare. So after ORR, an unaccompanied minor might be detained in ICE facilities. This is quite rare. We only found about 3% of unaccompanied youth experience ICE detention. But again, that should motivate us to inquire what is the experience of this incredibly vulnerable population in an adult facility with high security and very little oversight of ICE facilities. Just to give us also some context of how long they are in the United States, on average, unaccompanied children are in the United States for 3 years, and the legal team here can give some insights into why a child's case might last that long. And then I will just finish with I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that all unaccompanied children are 17-year-olds or 18-year-olds or 16-year-olds, and that's just really not the case. I want us to walk away with, if anything, that there is a range of experience represented among this population. And if we consider just even under 10, right? 10, I'm just picking a random age. We're talking about 15 to 17% of the unaccompanied population being less than 10 years old. That's like 1 in 5 children being less than 10 years old and representing them, attending court without a legal guardian. And then, of course, along these lines of demographic characteristics, you also see representation, right? So we see some of the lowest representation rates among these vulnerable populations, such as individuals that are young, so the youngest population. We see, for example, lower representation rates among boys than girls, especially lowest representation rates among older boys. They have a very hard time obtaining legal counsel. And yeah, I'll pause there and happy to illuminate any more characteristics or statistics that might be interesting to the group.
Yeah. So Mary and Amanda both, and we'll start with Mary. So how do you get your referrals? How are you matched with these young people who need representation?
Yeah. Well, there's an abundant need. So NIGC is contracted to provide legal services to a number of shelters in the Chicago area. And so the children that we meet with in the shelters there who end up being reunified with sponsors in our service area, they are the primary source of our cases because we are able to maintain continuous services for them. So we meet with them when they're detained, and if they go to a brother or an aunt who lives in Chicago or in rural Indiana, we're still able to provide ongoing services. But it's only recently that ORR has kind of started putting children in shelters that are close to their intended destination. So many children are released to Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, from shelters in other parts of the country, like Texas or California. And so the legal service providers there may refer cases to us. We also maintain a hotline. We have community referrals from schools, from social workers. We get our cases from lots of different places, but I think the majority of them are the kids we meet with who end up in shelters in Chicago.
Thank you for that. And Amanda, what about for you and your law firm?
I would say ours is pretty different. We do get the majority of our cases through word of mouth. And we are often in court multiple times a week representing other clients. A lot of times it's just kids, people coming up to us and asking for like a business card. Like they see us talking, like speaking Spanish to other clients, and they want our help. I would say that's the majority. Other thing, we do community work in the southwest side of Chicago with an organization over there. Other times it is referrals from like NIJC or the Children's Legal Center, where they're unable to take the case due to complexity or conflict of interest, and they are referred over to our office. Um, I would say the unique thing about being a private law firm is that we could follow the representation if they were to move to Texas or to Florida. We are able to continue to representing them, even if that means traveling to their home state now to go in front of immigration judge so they're not alone, or if they just want us to appear with them via WebEx, like we do that as well. So I would say the majority is word of mouth for us when we are taking clients.
And are you seeing that, Tatiana mentioned 3 years is the average time that a case is being represented? Is that what you're seeing too, Amanda?
I would say in my case, it's a bit longer. I would say unaccompanied minors tend to have a very long process, just because of the benefits they have when it comes to asylum, when it comes to special immigrant juvenile status, they are able, sometimes it takes 5, 7, 8 years. I've seen interviews being scheduled for asylum 7 years after they've applied. And then by that time, a lot of the kids are older where they have other benefits available to them. So we're able to kind of jump ship from the asylum and move on to something that's more beneficial for them.
And is that true for you too, Mary? Are you seeing that as well? What happens when
Definitely.
they age out, like they turn 18? What happens then?
Oh, great question. So, when they turn 18 in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, they're no longer considered minors. So, there is um, uh, they're supposed to release them to the least restrictive setting. And so many of the children are then released on their own recognizance to another adult. It's a release by ICE and not by ORR, because once the children turn 18, they are now under the jurisdiction of ICE. Their custody is determined by that. But there's a settlement agreement, the Garcia Ramirez settlement, that the NIJC was a part of, and that really challenges the government to hold to the requirement that ICE consider the least restrictive setting for any minor. So, but in terms of turning 18 for their legal case, there's not always a big shift there, because being designated a child, an unaccompanied child, usually is a benefit that stays with them throughout their legal case, particularly if they're able to start applying for status while they are minors. I think, yeah, the cases take a very long time, because one of the benefits for unaccompanied children in seeking asylum, for example, is that they have the opportunity to apply for asylum at the asylum office. It is a less adversarial setting. It's in an office building with an officer who's wearing a suit and not a uniform, and a judge and opposing counsel. So one of the benefits for children who are unaccompanied children have the opportunity to go there and fight their case, explain why they might merit asylum in that less adversarial setting. And if they're unable to convince the asylum officer of the merits of their case, then they are referred to an immigration judge and they have a second opportunity. Amanda referred to kids waiting a long, long time for an interview. There's a backlog at the asylum office. It is impossible to know at this point when cases will be heard. Sometimes they start with the most recent cases, and sometimes they pull them from the pile from 7 years ago. So it's really hard I would say that's one of the challenges is staying actively involved in the case for the duration. And then also on the opposite end, preparing a case very quickly can be hard with a child who's just arrived and is, still getting their bearings for life in the United States, and safety if they're seeking protection from harm. So there are lots of challenges in that. And then another type of relief from deportation that we have with unaccompanied children, as Amanda referred to it, it's special immigrant juvenile status. That's a type of status that is available to children who are abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. So it's one of the primary ways for unaccompanied children to pursue legal status. But there's a huge backlog of those cases as well. So even once they go through a pretty complicated legal process to obtain that, there is a wait of many years to be able to apply for a green card or even a work permit through that. So they go very slowly and through no fault of a child, through zero fault of a child.
Would you, the three of you, be willing to share any stories, specific stories that really stay with you, that you would want us to know about? Of course, withholding any names, but just, one or two stories that really have impacted you and how you feel about the work you do. I'll start with Tatiana. I know you've done research, but you know these personal cases, right?
I will, we'll start by saying I applaud all of the folks that work directly with this population, because the story that I had thought of when you asked this is my own personal reason why I don't work directly with the population anymore. So I'm going to refrain from sharing a story of an unaccompanied child and instead share a little bit about my own experience, one specific one that really altered the path that I took on doing this work. So during my time at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, I often provided translation services for children at USCIS. And in these non-adversarial interviews, oftentimes they're still collecting evidence, right? The intention of the interview is to collect as many details as possible so that the individual conducting the interview can determine whether this child has eligibility for relief for deportation and maybe qualifies for staying in the United States. And during one of these particular interviews, I was translating for a young girl. She probably was 10 years old or maybe a little bit younger than that. And in her own words, she was describing with the vocabulary that a 9 or 10-year-old has, the events of sexual abuse, consistent sexual abuse. And I couldn't get myself to say those words out loud in English. I froze. I felt sick. And of course, there's a phone in the middle of the room that provides backup translation and also corrects you if you ever mistranslate. And the phone spoke up and provided the translation that needed to be provided. But it was on that day that I decided I could not work directly with unaccompanied youth or immigrants in client-facing services. So just want to applaud the folks that do, because it's really hard work. I couldn't leave that at the door at 5 o'clock when I clocked out. And yeah, it's like my head was consumed with this feeling of there should be no 10-year-old girl being able to describe this in any way, shape, or form with any language. So I'll pause there because I'm going to get emotional about it. I'm sure that others have more stories that they can share.
Thank you for sharing that. Amanda.
Yeah, I would say the stories we hear are definitely very tragic, but other ones are, I would say, like a little bit more like beautiful. I had a client who lived with grandma in home country, and his mother left when he was maybe like 2 years old. So didn't remember what mom looked like, doesn't remember hugging her, nothing. But he came to the United States to reunify with mom, now 16 years old. And I think it's just like the emotion of like seeing your parent for the first time after only being able to speak to them on the phone for so long. I think that's one of the reasons why like I enjoy working with unaccompanied minors. Just their stories are so unique. And it's great to see, like a lot of them do have a future here. Like if they, are able to find this legal representation and able to find the correct help. Those are the stories that kind of keep me going. I've also had clients come in where it's a family of like it's three, four siblings where it's a 21-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 10-year-old, and 9-year-old, but parents are deceased. So now I talked to the 16-year-old and he's like, I'm just trying to work to, help my younger brothers. Like that's all I want to do. So a lot of those are those stories as well, where unfortunately like, parents are deceased. They passed away in home country and the only thing they thought they could do is come to the US to try to find a better future for themselves.
Thank you. Mary, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think it's hard to think of just one. Getting the opportunity to work with the children while they're in shelters, I think, sometimes for a long time, it's felt like it's very fast, right? 'Cause children for many years would be at the shelters for a brief amount of time, and then be released within a couple of weeks to a family member. That's changed a lot, and so I think one of the um, the opportunities that we have now is just to get to know the kids a little bit better while they're in the shelters, and it's been really rewarding to get to know them um, and and build the rapport that we have with them while they're still in the shelter, and to be um, a kind of resource for them while they're there. And I think another thing on that note is that being at NIJC, we have my team is just part of a bigger team, and so when our clients obtain asylum primarily, um, they are able to pursue a green card a year later, or even applied for naturalization through our like sister teams at the organization. And so it's always really so rewarding to see kids come back to apply for their green card, and to see how they're settling in and really establishing a life for themselves. It's really, really wonderful.
Kim, if I could interject, these stories are interesting, and I'm thinking that some of the people in the audience might also have questions they may want to ask once we get towards the end of this. So if you have
Yes.
questions, the audience, we do have a Q&A open. So just to mention, the league is nonpartisan, and we know that the panelists have their opinions on things, but I just ask that the questions also be asked in that spirit if you do ask them on the Zoom. So thank you, and I apologize for interrupting.
Oh, no problem. You can interrupt if anything else comes up that you want us to do, or the participants to do. Thank you, Karen. And thank you for sharing, Mary. One of the things that we had been thinking about is just the number of institutions that are involved in the process for these children at the various different stages, or maybe all of them at once. How well is the coordination between these various institutions, and including schools? Like, what roles do schools play in this process? And so whoever would like to go first. Or not.
I can start us off.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that there's a lot of coordination, I'll be honest. So, from the detained setting, there is the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is under Health and Human Services. And even though children are kept in their care, they are still in contact with ICE. So there are ICE officers who are designated as juvenile coordinators who specialize in children's cases. So they are serving new documents or following up on the cases of the children there. Once they're released from ORR custody, many times children have post-release services that is also provided by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, just to provide some additional support with the transition and going to a sponsor, getting enrolled in school, making sure, like trying to find legal services. But beyond that, there is a drop-off. And it really, really depends on the resources available in a child's community, in my experience. And I hope, Tatiana, you will enlighten us a little bit more on that. But sometimes children are able to enroll in school and really, hit the ground running in terms of being connected to other resources. School is so essential to doing so. But many of the kids, especially the older kids, may have a hard time enrolling, even if they want to, or have a hard time committing the amount of time necessary to stay in school when people are expecting them to work. So I think that's where we start to see like a split of kids who are able to receive resources connected through schools, connected through communities, and then the kids who are really on their own in many ways. And I think, as Tatiana pointed out earlier, language is a huge component of that. When kids speak Spanish, there are a lot more services available. If Spanish is not their best language, many of the children from Guatemala, which is the country that comprises the biggest percentage of unaccompanied children, don't speak Spanish fluently. It's not their best language. They may speak an indigenous language. But because they're Guatemalan, people think, oh, Spanish is fine. And it's not. It's not the language that they communicate. And it's very hard to obtain interpretation services in those languages. So kids become even more isolated, especially if they're in a more rural area where it's harder to find transportation. It's harder to find social services. It's harder to find folks able to provide services.
Tatiana, is that, seeing the lack of coordination between the different institutions, is that what your research supports?
Yeah, absolutely. We echo everything that Mary said. I would only add maybe two more factors. Before ORR, of course, a child likely encounters Border Patrol if they're entering through the U.S. southern border. So that would be kind of where the system officially registers a child's contact with a child. And that's where this NTA generally is provided. It's this document that says, hey, we encountered the individual. Then I would also add, and this is very rarely, so if a child's case is decided at USCIS, that's like the first branch. If it's not, they could go to immigration court. If they receive an unfavorable decision in immigration court, very small a number of folks do have the opportunity to appeal. So that would be the only other actor I would add to Mary's list. The Board of Immigration Appeals would be that very last possible place. I honestly don't know very much about the role of schools, just because my research is so limited to seeing the children in immigration court documents. I'm not very familiar with before they arrive in court, so the USCIS process, or what happens outside of court per se.
Thank you. And Amanda, what about for your clients?
Yeah, I would echo what Mary says. I think they do get the support, but once they are released from custody, it is kind of almost like a kind of figure it out yourself. I know when I was at my prior organization, we were the ones, we were helping kids with school, we were helping with social work services. And it was not because it was part of our grants or anything. It was more because we saw the need and we felt like we needed to do something to help these kids enroll in school or get the benefits that they needed to just live every day. So I would say there's definitely a lack of coordination among all the groups involved.
Do you think that is truer today than it has been in the past, or has it always been like this?
I think, unfortunately, I think it's always been like this, but I think we are seeing it more just with this administration, with how things are going. I think things are portrayed more on the news. So we're hearing about it more, but I do think it's always been like this, unfortunately.
And when the children cross the border and they have that interaction with the CBP, the Border Patrol, what are the steps immediately after that? So you I think it was one of you had mentioned you have this interview and then where are the kids, where are they kept? Where are they placed immediately after crossing the border? Are they in a border detention facility and how long and the I'm combining a bunch of other questions. The Flores settlement agreement, is how does this play in the work that you do and how you understand this? Any of you? Amanda.
I was just gonna say, I think Mary might have a better understanding of this, since she does work with like the detained kids. Uh,
Sure. So most often the children report being held in hieleras, which is a term for, ice boxes. They're usually cold centers, large centers near the border, that you probably have seen images of. That's the kids in cages kind of thing. Those are, the TVPRA provides a limitation for the number of hours. Really, that referral needs to happen within 72 hours. In past times where there have been higher volumes of people at the U.S.-Mexico border, we've seen some delays with getting to ORR custody, but generally that happens within a couple of days. As far as the Flores settlement, I think the Flores settlement is like an ever-present thing for it. It does apply to the children. It is something that provides ongoing protections for kids in custody. I don't like they're subject to it, and it's part of why the system has continued to exist, is so that they can be held in a less restrictive setting.
And this comes up because I know, and we all know, there are fewer people crossing the border right now. So you're probably seeing fewer unaccompanied children. However, there are a number of children who are being detained, and they are being detained longer than, I believe it's 20 days, that the agreement says they can't be held longer than 20 days in that detention setting, and that the administration is hoping for the agreement to be terminated, that they don't like it. They believe it's not necessary. And we don't have to talk about that anymore if you don't want to, but it is an agreement that is supposed to be protecting children, and hopefully in most cases still is. Let's talk about what are international law and US law. Are there any additional legal protections that we haven't talked about yet?
I think the ones that I mentioned are the ones that really come to mind for me. The idea that they have the opportunity to apply for asylum at, I'll add one more on that. But they are able to apply for asylum at the asylum office, even though they are in removal proceedings. They also are able to apply for asylum with like the 1 year bar, or the 1 year filing deadline doesn't exactly apply to them. Another thing is that unaccompanied children are able to apply for asylum even if they haven't articulated a credible fear. They don't have to undergo a credible fear interview like adults do at the border. So that it's one of the common things that we see with our clients is it takes a while to learn a child's story. This is a very scary and stressful experience that can take weeks even just to get to the US-Mexico border. And so the protection that is offered by the TVPRA to allow kids not to have to fight from like the first moment that they arrive at the US to explain why they merit protection is a really key protection, that's not an onus that's placed on them right away. So those are the ones that come to mind for me. straight away. I don't know if Amanda or Tatiana have others that stand out.
Yeah, I would also add in terms of asylum, while sometimes the interviews it could take 6, 7 years, and they can be like a 20-year-old now, the asylum officer or the judge is supposed to still view the harm in light of the like perspective of the child's age when that harm occurred. So they do get that extra legal protection as well, where it's no longer, it's like a 20-year-old facing this harm. Like, no, it was back when he was 13 and how he felt at that time and how the harm was perceived towards him then. I will also add like another legal protection that we talked about with the special immigrant juvenile status, but there also is the T visa for victims of trafficking, which we do see a lot with unaccompanied minors at my firm. And a lot of times it's unfortunately that parents have something to do with the trafficking of where they're sending their child to this random individual in the United States. And luckily, it sounds bad or it sounds weird to say, but luckily they are intercepted by CBP and they do make it out of that traffic situation before making it to that person. So that is another legal protection that UACs do have. And I would say we constantly are screening them for that because sometimes as a child, like they don't really understand what's happening. So again, it's really important to hear their story and kind of get all the details to see like what other things can we help you with.
Thank you. And I have one more question before I'm going to ask you to share what we haven't asked. But that's where in the process are the children most vulnerable? And so it's a two part question. And what happens when they are deported? When they lose their case and they are deported. And so I'm going to start with Tatiana.
Um, I would argue I spent last summer doing qualitative research in the deportation corridor, so the migration corridor and border crossings across Latin America, where folks were returned migration as a result of deportation. And I would argue that the place where folks are most vulnerable, and this includes exponentially children, is actually on the migration route. Yeah, I think they're extremely vulnerable to the environmental hazards of migration routes. This includes heat exposure, sun exposure, dehydration, extreme conditions. And by the fact that many of them are traveling on without a guardian, they're also extremely vulnerable to exploitation, trafficking, and sexual abuse on the migration corridor. And I would also argue the second place that I think they're most vulnerable would be in this moment when if they arrive to the United States at the cusp of turning 18. My experience when I was working at USCIS is that we would be hesitant to take on a case that was close to aging out, in part because there's a lot of process that has to happen to like secure them in the system, and a lot of grants at that time, maybe this has changed, were really tied to the age of recipients of services. I know that may be different now. It seems like that might have changed a bit in the last couple of years based on aging out not being so much of a highlighted point, but at least during that first Trump administration, when I was working at USCIS, aging out was a big moment of conversation for a child's case, and whether they were going to be able to secure pro bono legal services. Those would be the two that stand out the most to me.
Thank you, Mary.
I really appreciate that, Tatiana. Those are great points.
Yeah.
So I think my focus is once they are here. So so for me, I think right now it's when they first arrive where they are still just trying to figure things out, and they might be saying things that are adverse to their legal interests, and that makes it into the records of their cases that will remain their immigration records for the rest of their lives. And then also upon new release, where they are adapting to life with a sponsor, to life in the United States. So many kids tell us, I'm going to go to school until I'm 18. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to work until I'm 18. I'm going to go to school. And just knowing how hard it is to get started in school, especially, and in the cases of many of the kids that we work with, they've been out of school for many years. And so to start a new high school, not speaking English, not like having been out of school, having maybe a 7th grade education, it's just it's so hard to be able to make it work for the kids. So that's what stands out to me.
Thank you, Amanda.
I would echo what Mary says. When they first come to the United States, yeah, they are just kind of just saying things, and sometimes it does have an adverse effect to their legal proceedings. I've had cases where the client doesn't remember saying stuff, but once we have but the government be like, oh, but you said this and this, so your parent didn't abandon you, you weren't abused, like you never said that here. And then we'll have to get the records from OR, and they did say that, but I mean, it's a 9-year-old saying things like they're not really knowing what they're saying. They're kind of just coming in for the first time, a bunch of people asking them questions. So I will say that's when they're most vulnerable. They thinking they're just getting help from these people, but it's actually going to affect them in the long term.
And then Amanda, so what haven't we asked so far? What do you want us to know?
I think the biggest thing is just the lack of legal representation in the court for unaccompanied minors. I think how Tatiana said, majority do speak Spanish, but we do have the children who do speak indigenous languages. And at an immigration court hearing, the judge kind of just, we only have a Spanish interpreter provided by the court. So all these children that don't speak Spanish, and the judge is trying to speak to them, and they kind of just nod their head because they don't have legal counsel, and then they're sent on their way with the new court date. It's kind of like those are the ones that get lost in the system and end up having that deportation order because they don't have legal representation. And unfortunately, while the judge does offer them these legal services, like I'm going to give you this list of legal providers that are for free, like also in Spanish. So these kids are looking at this piece of paper, like I don't like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I think those are big things that like it's important to know like why this legal representation is not there for unaccompanied minors.
Thank you, Mary.
There are two things that come to mind. The first is, you mentioned that we aren't seeing a lot of kids coming into the United States right now, but we are seeing really consistent numbers at our shelters because the government is changing the policies to allow for children to be released to their families. So kids are languishing in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement because ORR is changing the rules for the parents and the family members and making it increasingly difficult for families to meet the requirements, including for parents to receive their own children. Things like asking them to have an identity document that's issued in the United States when a passport clearly identifies an adult. And that's just one of many things. So it used to be that the average length of stay for a child in ORR custody was 30 days. And that was a mix of some kids going very quickly, within 10 days, maybe to a parent. And now, and like on the longer end would be a couple of months if they had a couple different sponsors. Now we've had kids easily 6 months. And they have a parent. A parent is here to receive them. So that's that is really sticking with me. And then the other thing is that starting at the end of last year, there is a fee assessment that is being assigned to children who are entering the United States without status. So the U.S. government is asking them, or not asking, sorry, it's not an ask. It's a penalty. It's a fee. It's a fine. They're fining children, and they're able to fine them of over $5,000, and they are assessing those fines. And so the idea that the system that is intended to protect children from trafficking situations, right? The trafficking TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, set up the system to be able to help children not be in trafficking situations. But instead, we have a fine of $5,000 placed on a child's head, and providing no real venue for the child to be able to appeal that or pay for that. It's a lot of money. And then incentivizing return on top of that. So it doesn't seem to make sense that that we're trying to protect children from trafficking and then putting them into a desperate situation where we're asking money of them. Feels really discordant to me. So I just wanted to share about
thank
that
you.
too.
Thank you for bringing that up. And Tatiana, what about you?
Well, I wanted to shed some light on, you asked what could possibly folks do if they want to be more engaged. That was one of the questions that we could close with. And I wanted to speak to that because I think Amanda and Mary have filled so much of the tied up the loose ends of our conversation so well. So if you're interested in supporting this population, I think the things I would recommend folks do is to support your legal aid institutions and organizations. I just can't say enough how much legal representation matters for case outcomes, for preventing that unaccompanied minors that could get relief from deportation, could adjust their status here, from preventing them in ending up in a deportation, in a situation of deportation. And so legal teams do so much better than individual children could ever do in immigration court. So if you're able to support your legal organizations, please do so. And I would just add to that it doesn't necessarily mean monetarily. If you have language skills, even non-common language skills, which I think we've already harped on, is really helpful. If you're in Minnesota, which I don't know how many of you guys are, if you speak Somali, if you speak French Creole, if you speak an indigenous language, like those are services that are immensely helpful, even for a child, just to have someone that is in front of them helping them translate and navigate the documents that they have to fill. And then I do want to end on just saying, like, I think just being willing to hear a diverse range of perspectives and opening your heart to the possibility of having your mind changed or learning something that you didn't know. Think that it helps us humanize this dialogue and gain empathy for a population that's just incredibly vulnerable to a system that even I, as an English speaker that's very educated, would have a very hard time navigating on my own. And we're expecting that children do so. So I hope that that's a good closing and
Mhm.
Absolutely. And now we have questions
Now we
from
do have a
our
few
audience.
questions. We do have a few questions from the audience. So there are a number of questions here. A lot of people are saying how heartbreaking this is, and that's understandable. And so we, it's heartbreaking to hear they don't have a sponsor to stay with. And are there any actions or are there ways for any of these children to be put in the foster system, or other ways for these children to be taken care of that is not detention in this country?
I can take this one. When children don't have a sponsor that they can be released to, or a sponsor that ORR is willing to approve, there's an option for them within the ORR network for long-term foster care that is funded through ORR, which is independent of the state child welfare systems. So generally that is an option for children who have no one to receive them. And if they're able to obtain lawful status, and that there is another program administered by the U.S. government for unaccompanied refugee minors, that is, again, a supportive system for children under 21 who are unaccompanied. Generally, there isn't a lot of overlap. Sometimes there have been situations with our clients where we've wanted them to enter into DCFS care. And it's hard. It's hard to be able to get into that. And then a separate project at my organization also serves unaccompanied children who end up in DCFS care as well. I think there was a second part to your question, but I forgot.
Yeah, that's okay. There are a few questions about how these children are if they're denied asylum, how do they get back to be deported? How did they get from here to wherever they're going? What's the transport?
As far as I know, it's not a very different situation from adults in that case. They are given a time to show up. They are transported by the U.S. government. One of the types of relief that we pursue, sometimes children in custody or after custody do want to return to their home countries. And so there is a program of voluntary departure under safeguards, such that like a responsible adult in the United States, a government agent, travels with them and ensures that they are received by an adult in their home country. My understanding, at least from the detained for minors, it would be a similar situation in that they would be turned over to a state agent in their home country upon return. But and they're segregated, I think, from the adult population during their transit in that way. But yeah, that's how they would return, as far as I understand. Amanda or Tatiana, please correct me if you have an understanding that's different.
No, I'm under the same. That is very similar to the adults, where they are kind of just they wait until they have enough people to return to that country, and then they are taken there all together, and children would be released to an adult there, whereas adults would just be released. Yeah. Mhm.
There is a specific question about Chicago and an organization called Heartland, which I'm sure this is probably happening across the country, but Heartland housed unaccompanied minors in the Chicago area, but they've had to close several locations due to funding cuts, national funding cuts. So will the lack of these obviously create issues and affect services for these minor immigrants?
Yeah, so Heartland has closed two long-term programs that have been a part of the Unaccompanied Children Network for a very long time. And I think this is happening across the country. The government is pointing to lower bed numbers that don't justify keeping as many shelters open. And I also just want to highlight in this point, because this is related to what Tatiana said, is that the government also has tried to cancel funding for legal service providers as well over the last year. And so I think it's part of a greater effort to reduce the spending on this whole system. They've been able to effectively reduce the number of children entering the United States, and now reducing the bed numbers in these really drastic ways. So, but as far as serving the children of Chicago, that's not related to the Heartland programs. I think it means that fewer children will be in ORR custody in the Chicago area, but I don't think it has an impact on released children.
We have just, I just want to.
Can I interrupt for just 1 second,
Oh,
Karen?
sure.
If we can't get to all the questions, is it possible that we could email the speakers and have them respond back to us, and we could share it with the participants?
Yes, that's fine with me.
It'd be great.
Okay,
So I have
thank you.
I just have two questions left that I'm kind of summarizing what we're having online here. One of them is just about specifically what can we do. This league is always about action, and I'm not surprised to see those questions in here about what specifically, besides giving money to legal aid institutions, are there other things, volunteer, what can we be doing? So that's one. And the second one, for all of you to think about, maybe we end on that. What would be a success story for these children, just to maybe end on a little bit of hope?
I would say something that other than donating is becoming a child advocate through the Young Center. So I know this, my own mom does this, where you're a child advocate, you are assigned a specific child in a facility, and you meet with them weekly, kind of just talk to them. If you're able to go in person, you play games with them, just kind of get their story and see what the best solution is for them, whether that's being released to a parent, an uncle, an aunt, and kind of seeing like what they want in their life. if you speak Spanish, that's even better. But they do offer translation services as well. So I know that's a great volunteer service that if you guys were interested in, definitely check out the Young Center. Mhm.
Tatiana, or Mary, do you have a suggestion?
I mean, to add on to that, the Young Center is wonderful and they do amazing work, and they're kind of serve the role as advocating for the child's best interest, kind of like the guardian ad litem in this system. So we love the Young Center. I think the only other thing that I could think of is getting involved in schools, and in providing support and maybe volunteering to help kids who are struggling to catch up to where to in adapting and tutoring perhaps. There are some other organizations. I'm thinking of Biter House of Hospitality and Bethany House of Hospitality are two organizations that receive children who age out of or custody and have no one to receive from. And they provide supportive housing and so like wraparound services for the kids in their care. And they need help learning how to drive. They need help, grocery shopping, cooking, all sorts of things of helping young adults become adults. And so I think those are two organizations to become involved with as well, that just appreciate the support and life skills that any adult can provide.
Great.
We can't hear you.
You're muted,
I'm
Karen.
sorry. What would be a success story for these children? If we see them, what in your mind is a success story for them? Anyone want to jump into that? I hope that there's at least we can leave on a little bit of hope for.
No, I would say I worked with children who came when they were like young teenagers, so 12-year-old, 13-year-olds, and now seeing them go to school in like Columbia University, like these great institutions. It's definitely something that makes me proud and makes me like happy for what I do because we are giving them this opportunity to continue this life and have this great education, which I'm sure they never thought they would make it this far, like when they were in their home country and even when they first got here with all the struggles. So it's just, I think also something just to leave with is like, while these kids, like we want to feel like we feel bad for them, but also like these kids are so resilient. They come looking for a better life and they really push for that once they're in the United States.
That's great. Anyone else? Gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just add, that the definition of success has changed so much over the years. And so it's really wonderful to see a child get their green card, or to graduate from high school or to enroll in college. Like we love getting invitations to like people's graduation parties. Like it's so exciting. But, having access to a work permit right now, getting released from OR or custody, these are things to celebrate for our team.
Well, I'd like to, unless there's something else anyone wants to say, I would like to thank Kim for being a wonderful moderator for this really August group. I'm really impressed with all of your credentials and the conversation. And we would love to be able to email you. There are a few questions that remain unanswered. And we appreciate all of your time here this evening. And thank you all who've been online and listening to this. This will be recorded and we'll have it on our website and our YouTube channel so that other people can get themselves educated on this topic. And hopefully we'll create a list of opportunities for either donation or volunteers, and we'll also provide that to the group. So thanks again, everybody. And we hope to see you soon at another league event in the future.
Thank you all.
Thanks.